12-year-old Jonah Harris wasn't the type to ignore someone in need. Growing up in a modest neighborhood, his family didn't have much, but they had taught him the value of kindness and compassion. On his way home from school one brisk autumn afternoon, Jonah noticed a woman sitting on a bench near the bus stop. Her head was bowed, her dark hair falling in tangled waves over her face. She wore a faded coat that barely seemed warm enough for the cool weather, and her hands rested protectively over her rounded stomach. Jonah slowed his pace, his brow furrowing. Something about her posture, a mix of exhaustion and despair, made him stop. Are you okay?" Jonah asked hesitantly, shifting his school bag higher on his shoulder. The woman looked up, startled. Her face was pale, her eyes red and swollen, as though she'd been crying for hours. She gave a weak smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm fine, thank you," she said, though her voice wavered. Jonah wasn't convinced. He could tell she was trying to hold herself together, but her trembling hands gave her away. "Are you sure?" he pressed gently. "You don't look fine." She hesitated, then sighed deeply, her shoulders slumping. "I'm trying to get home," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to take the bus, but I don't have enough money. I've been walking all day and I'm so tired." Jonah's chest tightened. He thought about the money in his pocket, his allowance for the week. He had been saving every penny to buy a second-hand bike he'd seen at the local thrift store. It was scratched up and missing a bell, but to Jonah, it was perfect. He was only a few dollars away from making it his. But as he looked at the woman before him, he knew he couldn't walk away. "Hold on," Jonah said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a few crumpled bills and a handful of coins, the entirety of his allowance. Without a second thought, he held it out to her. "Here. This should be enough for the bus fare." The woman's eyes widened, and for a moment she simply stared at him. "I can't take your money," she said quickly, shaking her head. "You're just a kid, you probably need it." Jonah shrugged, offering her a small smile. "It's okay. You need it more than I do. Please take it." Her hands trembled as she reached out, hesitating before accepting the money. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and she wiped them away with the sleeve of her coat. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You don't know how much this means to me." "I thank you." Jonah felt a warmth spread through his chest. "It's no problem. Just take care of yourself, okay?" The woman nodded, clutching the money tightly. A few minutes later, a bus pulled up to the stop. Jonah stayed by the bench as she boarded, making sure she got on safely. She turned to the window, waving at him through the glass as the bus pulled away. Jonah waved back, a soft smile on his face. As he walked the rest of the way home, Jonah felt lighter somehow, as if he had done something that truly mattered. He might not have been able to buy his bike just yet, but he knew he had helped someone in a moment of need. And that, he thought, was worth far more. Jonah returned home that evening, feeling a quiet sense of fulfillment. He didn't tell anyone about what had happened, not even his parents. It wasn't because he thought they wouldn't approve, it simply felt like something he didn't need to explain. Helping the woman had been the right thing to do, and that was enough for him. The next day, life continued as usual. Jonah spent his Saturday morning mowing lawns for neighbors to earn his allowance. The autumn leaves made the task a little more challenging, but he didn't mind. He was determined to start saving again, even if it took longer to get the bike he wanted. At lunch, Jonah's mother noticed he seemed quieter than usual. "Everything all right, sweetheart?" she asked, placing a bowl of warm soup in front of him. "Yeah. I'm fine," Jonah replied, his voice casual. He didn't want to make a big deal out of what he had done. His father, sitting across the table, raised an eyebrow. "You're not thinking about quitting your lawn mowing business, are you? You've been saving up for that bike for months." Jonah shook his head quickly. "No way, Dad. I'll get it eventually." Still, he couldn't shake the image of the woman's tearful face as she clutched the money he had given her. For the rest of the weekend, it lingered in his mind. He wondered if she had made it home safely. Did she have someone waiting for her? Did she have enough to eat? On Monday morning, Jonah went back to school. Between math problems and science experiments, he managed to distract himself, though every now and then his thoughts drifted back to the bus stop. He didn't know why he couldn't stop thinking about it. After school, Jonah was walking home when his neighbor, Mrs. Finch, stopped him. She was an older woman with a kind face, known for baking cookies for the neighborhood kids. "Jonah, I heard about what you did," she said, smiling warmly. Jonah blinked in surprise. "You did?" Mrs. Finch nodded. "I saw you at the bus stop the other day, helping that poor woman. That was such a kind thing to do, Jonah. Your parents must be so proud." Jonah felt his cheeks grow warm. "It wasn't a big deal," he said quickly, looking down at his sneakers. "It was a very big deal," Mrs. Finch insisted. "Not everyone would give what they had to help a stranger. You've got a good heart, Jonah." She reached into her pocket and handed him a small envelope. "Here. It's not much, but I want you to have this." Jonah opened the envelope to find a crisp $20 bill. He looked up at her, wide-eyed. "I can't take this, Mrs. Finch." "Yes, you can," she said firmly, patting his shoulder. "Consider it a reward for your kindness. And if you ever need anything, you come to me, okay?" Jonah reluctantly accepted the money, thanking her quietly. As he walked home, he felt a mix of emotions. He was grateful for Mrs. Finch's gesture, but he didn't feel like he deserved a reward. After all, he hadn't helped the woman at the bus stop for any kind of recognition. That evening, Jonah decided to tell his parents about what had happened. As they sat around the dinner table, he recounted the story, from meeting the woman to giving her his allowance. His father leaned back in his chair, nodding slowly. "You've got a good head on your shoulders, son. I'm proud of you." His mother smiled, her eyes glistening with tears. "Kindness has a way of coming back to you, Jonah. You did the right thing." Jonah felt a warm glow in his chest. He still didn't know if he'd ever see the woman again, but for the first time, he allowed himself to feel proud of what he had done. What Jonah didn't realize was that his simple act of kindness had already set something in motion, something that would soon change his life and his family's life in ways they could never have imagined. Life settled back into its usual rhythm for Jonah and his family. His father continued working long hours at the factory, while his mother kept busy stitching clothing to sell at the market. Jonah returned to mowing lawns and walking dogs after school, slowly rebuilding his savings. The bike felt like a distant goal now, but he didn't mind. He knew he'd get there eventually. One chilly afternoon, a week after Mrs. Finch had praised his generosity, Jonah came home to find his mother standing at the door, looking puzzled. "Jonah, there's someone here to see you," she said. Jonah's stomach flipped. Visitors weren't common at their modest home, especially not for him. He stepped inside to find a man waiting in their small living room. The stranger was neatly dressed in a dark suit, carrying a leather briefcase. His face was kind, and his eyes lit up when he saw Jonah. "You must be Jonah Harris," the man said warmly, standing to greet him. Jonah nodded, his mind racing. "Yes, sir, that's me." The man extended a hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you. My name is Daniel Whitaker. I'm here on behalf of someone you helped recently." Jonah blinked in confusion. "Someone I helped?" Mr. Whitaker smiled, setting his briefcase down on the coffee table. "A few weeks ago, you gave your pocket money to a woman at the bus stop. She was trying to get home and didn't have enough for the fare. Do you remember?" Jonah nodded slowly. "Yes, I remember. Is she okay?" "She's more than okay, thanks to you," Mr. Whitaker said. "Her name is Clara Bennett. She wanted me to tell you how much your kindness meant to her that day. She'd been having a very difficult time losing her job, facing eviction, and struggling to prepare for the arrival of her baby. Your act of generosity gave her the hope she desperately needed." Jonah felt his cheeks flush. I just did what anyone would do. Mr. Whitaker's smile widened. Not everyone would have done what you did, Jonah. Clara shared your story with her family, and they were deeply moved. They wanted to express their gratitude in a meaningful way. He opened his briefcase and pulled out an envelope. This is for you and your family. It's a token of appreciation for your kindness. Jonah hesitated, glancing at his parents, who were now standing nearby, equally stunned. His father spoke first. What's in the envelope? Mr. Whitaker handed it to Jonah's father. $5,000. Clara's family insisted on giving this to Jonah for his future education. The room fell silent. Jonah's father opened the envelope, his hands trembling slightly, and stared at the neatly stacked bills inside. Jonah's mother gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. I don't know what to say, Jonah's father stammered. This is unbelievable. It's the least we can do, Mr. Whitaker said gently. Clara's family believes in paying kindness forward, just as Jonah did. They want to make sure he has the chance to achieve his dreams. Jonah stood frozen, his heart pounding. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. All he had done was give a few dollars to someone in need. How could something so small lead to this? His mother pulled him into a tight hug, tears streaming down her face. Jonah, I'm so proud of you, she whispered. Mr. Whitaker rose to leave. But before he stepped out the door, he turned back to Jonah. You reminded Clara and her family that even in the darkest times, there's still kindness in the world. Don't ever underestimate the power of a small act of compassion. As the door closed behind him, Jonah sat on the couch, his mind racing. He had never imagined that something so simple could have such a profound impact. But as he looked at his parents' faces full of gratitude and pride, he realized that kindness truly did have the power to change lives. The days that followed felt surreal to Jonah and his family. The envelope of money sat securely in a drawer in his parents' bedroom, but its presence seemed to lighten the entire house. Jonah's father, who had always been cautious and serious, now had a spring in his step. His mother, too, seemed more relaxed as she prepared meals and worked on her sewing projects. Still, the family knew they had to be careful. This money isn't for spending on just anything, Jonah's father said firmly one evening as they sat together in the living room. It's for your education, Jonah. We're going to make sure it's used the right way. Jonah nodded, fully agreeing. The idea that his kindness could help secure his future still felt like a dream. But he didn't take it lightly. He started to see school in a new light, putting in extra effort to do his homework and asking his teachers more questions. Despite the newfound sense of stability, life still had its challenges. Jonah's father worked fewer overtime shifts now, but the family continued to live modestly. Their old car broke down on a cold morning, and Jonah's mother had to take the bus to the market. Jonah helped wherever he could, offering to run errands and even picking up an extra lawn mowing job to pitch in. One Saturday afternoon, while Jonah was walking Mrs. Finch's dog, she stopped him with a warm smile. Jonah, you've always been such a good boy, but there's something different about you lately. You seem inspired. Jonah smiled back, thinking about the changes in his life since meeting Mr. Whitaker. I guess I just feel really lucky, he said. Helping someone made me realize how much we all need each other sometimes. Mrs. Finch nodded, her eyes twinkling. That's a rare understanding for someone your age. Don't lose it. Jonah continued his routine, but he noticed how much he paid attention to the people around him. At school, he shared his lunch with a classmate who often went hungry. On his way home, he helped a woman carry her groceries up a steep hill. These small acts of kindness became part of who he was, filling him with a sense of purpose. One evening, Jonah's father received a call from his employer. At first, he sounded concerned, but his tone shifted as the conversation continued. When he hung up, his face was lit with excitement. They're offering me a new position, he said. Better hours and a small raise? That's wonderful, Harold, Jonah's mother exclaimed, pulling him into a hug. Jonah grinned. "That's great, Dad." "It might not seem like much," his father said, "but it's going to help us a lot. I think things are starting to look up for our family." The positivity seemed to ripple through their lives. Jonah's mother started getting more customers for her sewing work, and even Jonah's schoolwork began to improve. It was as if the small act of kindness Jonah had shown at the bus stop had set off a chain reaction, touching every part of their lives. A few weeks later, Jonah was back at the thrift store. He had saved enough to finally buy the second-hand bike he had been dreaming of. As he wheeled it out of the shop, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of satisfaction. It wasn't just the bike that made him happy, it was the knowledge that he had earned it while doing something good for others. As he rode home, the cool autumn air brushing against his face, Jonah thought about the path his life had taken. He had started with nothing but a few crumpled bills and a willingness to help. Now, his future felt brighter than ever, and he knew that kindness had been the key to it all. As the seasons began to shift from autumn to winter, Jonah found himself reflecting on how much had changed. The act of helping the woman at the bus stop had been a small moment, but it had turned into something extraordinary. His family felt more stable, his father's new position at work eased their financial burdens, and Jonah was proud of how he was growing not just in responsibility but in kindness and understanding. One frosty December morning, there was another knock at the Harris family's door. Jonah's mother opened it, revealing a familiar face. It was Mr. Whitaker, the man who had brought them the envelope of money weeks earlier. This time, he wasn't alone. Standing beside him was the woman Jonah had helped at the bus stop. She was holding a bundle in her arms, a newborn baby wrapped in a soft yellow blanket. Mr. Whitaker began with a warm smile. "Clara wanted to come by and thank you in person." Clara stepped forward, her eyes shining with emotion. "I don't think I'll ever be able to express how grateful I am for what you did," she said, her voice trembling. "That day, I felt like I had no one and no hope. Your kindness reminded me that there are still good people in the world. Because of you, I made it home safely, and I was able to get the help I needed from my family." Jonah felt a lump form in his throat. "I'm just glad you're okay," he said softly, his gaze drifting to the tiny baby in her arms. "Is this your baby?" Clara nodded, her smile widening. "This is Grace. She was born 2 weeks ago, healthy and strong. I wanted you to meet her because, in a way, you're part of the reason she's here. You gave me the strength to keep going." Jonah's mother wiped tears from her eyes, and his father placed a steady hand on Jonah's shoulder. "That's a beautiful name," his mother said. Clara laughed gently, brushing a tear from her cheek. "I thought so too," she paused, then added, "I wanted to give you something. I know your kindness wasn't about getting anything in return, but I couldn't come empty-handed." She handed Jonah a small wrapped package. He hesitated, looking at her and then at his parents before carefully unwrapping it. Inside was a notebook with a simple cover, embossed with the words "Dream Big." "It's nothing fancy," Clara said. "But I thought you might use it to write down your dreams, your goals, whatever inspires you. Because I can already tell you're going to do incredible things in life." Jonah held the notebook tightly, his heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. As Clara left with Mr. Whitaker and baby Grace, Jonah stood at the door, watching them disappear into the snowy morning. His parents wrapped him in a hug, proud of the person he was becoming. That evening, Jonah sat at his desk with the notebook open in front of him. He picked up a pencil and wrote 3 simple words on the first page: "Be kind always." From that day forward, Jonah carried the lessons of that moment with him. The money, the praise, and the unexpected blessings were all wonderful. But what mattered most was the reminder that even the smallest act of kindness could ripple outward, touching lives in ways he could never predict. Years later, when Jonah graduated at the top of his class and received a scholarship to a prestigious university, he often thought back to the day at the bus stop. It became a story he told not to boast, but to inspire others to believe in the power of compassion. The Harris family never forgot how one small act had transformed their lives, and Jonah grew up to embody the words he had written in the notebook, living each day with the quiet, steadfast belief that kindness could truly change the world.